This session is running a VFP app as a Windows service. Now, as we get started, I want to give you a little eye towards some information that might be useful to you to understand what's happening today. Literally, the last 3 months, I spent most of the time in the hospital. I had surgery, and after I had surgery, when I left, they found out I had emergency appendicitis. And then I had to have an eye operation, and coming home from the eye operation, I fell on the sidewalk, and I have a concussion. So the truth is, I can't really see most of what's on the screen. So hopefully, it's laid out decently. I had someone actually type it and put it up there while I went over with them verbally what it was I wanted them to do. And there is a white paper on my website. I don't know if it's completely finished. I don't know if it's completely as proofed as it should be, but you could certainly take a look at it. I think it'll be useful. The URL is there on your screen. And this is actually probably the first time that I was ever late with something and had a really good excuse. So I hope everybody will understand that. We have a lot of juicy material we can learn together today, and I think the information will be of service to everybody. See, even after smacking my head, I just can't resist those jokes. Let's get going. Right, this session, we're going to monitoring message queues and report requests. These are things that really require what Windows calls a service. The fact is that Windows services have existed all the way back since the very, very first Windows 3.0. Windows services have evolved over time in every Windows version. And of course, as is Microsoft's way of doing things, they change. They don't always tell you how they change, but they change. So to have a VFP application run as a service is something that you don't normally think of. What we're going to do today is we're going to see what the case would be for why we would want to have a VFP app run as a service. And then we'll see how we can create such an app that will actually run as the service, and we'll create it and we'll get it going as a service here, and we'll see live how it can help us. My company is called Vinitsky Consulting. We develop and market major applications for nonprofit organizations, and we do custom software and website development. And we have clients all over the place, from Fortune 500 companies to mom and pop shop where there's barely a mom. Now, according to the rules of Visual Fox Fest, I'm required to tell you why you should listen to me. So this is why you should listen to me, I guess. I have a lot of experience going back to the days of Foxbase and CompuServe. I've written articles for places like Fox Talk, been a presenter. And one of the things I really enjoy is expanding the capabilities of FoxPro, looking how to connect FoxPro to other kinds of things, whether it's services or the web or whatever it happens to be. We're going to see today what a Windows service is. We're going to compare a service versus a COM object. We're going to create an app that needs to consume services, and then we're going to make a service app for that. We're going to install our service app. We're going to actually run our service app and use it. We're going to talk about a couple of gotchas, and that will take us through our lessons today. Now, there will be some illustrations throughout these slides. So this is a disclaimer that I have mentioned before, but it's equally true now. All illustrations are copyrighted by Nessie Vinitsky Schiff. The fact that her name is similar to mine is just a coincidence. She is probably one of the most famous illustrators in the world, just in case anybody was curious. And we'll also have some help from our friend Dave the Serviceman. We'll be hanging around to give us a hand here. The first thing we want to know is, what is a Windows service? Before we can make the case for why we need a service, we need to understand a little bit about Windows services. Now, when we developers think of creating a Windows service, we tend to think we're going to need to write the code for the service in C++ or C# or something similar like that. But it's possible to adapt a VFP application to run as a service that will be indistinguishable from any other Windows services. This is Microsoft's official definition of what a service is: an application that serves a core operating system function and runs in the background and has no user interface. Now, those last few words there, no user interface, are a new thing, relatively new thing. The original idea behind services was that it could open up a user interface. However, as Windows developed, the service is run in what's called a protected ring. And while the discussion of that is not really something we're going to get into today, it makes opening a UI almost impossible. So therefore, now a Windows service can have no UI functions, no error messages, nothing like that. Now, in order to run as a quote-unquote service, the only requirement Microsoft has is that your service has to respond to 3 commands: start, stop, and pause. That's all it has to do. If your program, your application is running, and it can respond to a start, stop, and pause command, it can qualify as a service. And if we open our task manager, we're used to seeing in our task manager here, we're used to seeing in our task manager a tab that says services. And these services are all in one of 2 states. They're either running or they're not running. Now, there's a third state, which is disabled. You cannot uninstall a service yourself. Once a service has been installed, you cannot just delete that service. Most people turn off a service by disabling it because there's no actual way that you can uninstall a service yourself. You need the uninstall program that came with the original application. That's really the only way that you can uninstall a service. So services are either stopped or started. Now, I said there were 3 settings. There were stop, start, and pause. I have no idea what pause would do. There's no status listed for any service as paused. The only status listed for a service is start and stop. So it seems that pause means pause while something else happens, but it's not clear. I was looking through all the example services that Microsoft provides and how to build a service, and none of them had a pause command in them. So I've been unable to determine exactly what that pause is supposed to do, but nonetheless, theoretically, it has to do that. As I mentioned, typically we disable a service. Other than disabled, we can set a service to be started automatically when the computer starts, when Windows starts, or it can be started manually. That's our start command that it has to accept. And then it has to accept the stop command as well. Now, everything I just told you about Microsoft services is a lie, because most services cannot be controlled with start, stop, and pause commands. And in fact, most Microsoft Windows services cannot be controlled with those commands. That was the original idea, and that is the official requirement for a service. And if you look in the list of services, maybe 60% of the Microsoft services are actually able to respond to these commands. Most services that Microsoft creates and that third-party vendors create cannot respond to those commands. So what they do is they put a wrapper around it. Now, we would like to believe that each one of these services interacts directly with Windows, because that's what Microsoft claims. But the truth is that Microsoft created a Windows program called SVC Host. And if you've ever looked in your task manager, you see a ton of SVC hosts. And it's not clear what they all are. And there's a reason for that, because those are all wrappers around services. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is that since most services from third-party vendors and a significant number of services from Microsoft actually use a wrapper to respond to commands, there's no reason we can't do the same thing. So our VFP app doesn't know about start, stop, and pauses. So it would seem, hey, we're out of the service business. But no, if Microsoft Windows can use a wrapper, then so can we. So the first thing we're going to see is that a service is not quite as intimidating as it sounds, because it really doesn't have to do all that. There are wrapper programs built into Windows that will wrap around the service and will start and stop the executable when it receives a start and stop command. Now, services are very different from COM objects. Now, we're used to working with COM objects in VFP, either calling COM objects or using VFP to create COM objects. You know, we use our red server 32, And once we register it, we're able to call it by simply instantiating create object. So for example, if I wish to create an Excel object, I would do create object, Excel.worksheet, and I now have a reference to an instantiation of Excel. But that reference and that Excel has to be created by me now. An object is created. And once it's created, I can access all of its properties and methods. Right? But running it as a service means that I don't have to start it. I don't have to call it. It's always there doing its stuff. I don't have to tell it anything. With a COM object, I have to instantiate that object. I have to either call the appropriate methods, set the appropriate properties, and go ahead and do whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish. So if I want to open an Excel spreadsheet, I have to get a COM object for Excel.worksheet. Then I have to use the open method, and then I have to give it a property as the file name. That's a lot of interaction that only happens when I want it to happen. A service has no interaction like that, and it's always there. So it's completely the opposite of a COM object. So why do we even need then, if we can already use the COM objects, what would be the point of going and making a whole app to run as a service instead of a COM object? Now, I told you that a service is running all the time, and I don't have to instantiate it. But so what? So a service can run with nobody logged in. Now, there's going to be a few bullet points here. I don't want to be one of those guys that's super into bullet points, but it's important that we get an idea of these differences here, because a service can run with nobody logged in. So, for example, when I start up the server, my server, and it's sitting there saying, press Control-Alt-Delete to log in, services are already running. Now, when I reboot my computer, the service is still there again. It's always there. I don't have to reinstantiate anything. And if the user logs back off, and you're back to the Control-Alt-Delete to log in screen, the service is still there. And this is something we'll get to a little bit later, but a COM object runs with the same security level as the user who calls it. So if I'm running VFP as user Fred, and I instantiate the Excel object, Excel now has the same network and security rights as the user Fred. Services don't work that way. It doesn't matter what user I'm logged in as. Services have a specific set of rights and security regardless of who's logged in or who's using them. Now, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. In our case today, it's going to be a good thing, because we don't need to know what kind of security is needed to access these files and objects, because the service will take care of it for us. And of course, as we've mentioned, there's no really need to do anything, call anything. The service is running all the time and does whatever it's supposed to do. They're easy to start and stop. Now, it's possible to run a service with elevated security, so that even though I, the user Fred, cannot do something or access something, my service might be able to. The application might not be able to. I'm not going to let my application log in as local system account, but the service can do that. And services are built in with the idea, or built with the idea of being able to automatically restart themselves if it crashes. So if your Excel object crashes for some reason, you're stuck. Excel is not going to automatically restart the object for you, but a service will do exactly that. And the service will share a single running process. We're going to get to that a little bit later. That's an awful lot of bullet points, but there are a few disadvantages. Two big disadvantages are no user interface. And here's a tricky one. A service cannot access mapped drives unless you change the service to run as a user like Fred, which you lose a lot of benefit to that. If you want to have the service run as a user that can access all the different things you need, it cannot access any map drives. So if you have a network map drive, the service will be unable to access it. Now, if we compare, we see the advantages are very long and disadvantages are only a couple. The map drive and the no user interface, if one of those is a deal breaker, then you're not going to be able to use the service. There are ways around the map drive problem. There are no ways around the user interface problem. If your service needs to be able to display an error message to the user and give them an option to do something, the service will not be able to do that. But basically, we think of a COM object as a tool. It's a tool to be used by an application. But a service functions independently or as an application tool. A COM object is only used when we call it in our application and ask it to do something. A service runs all the time and can function completely independently of our program. We can log out of our program, log off the system, and the service will still be sitting there doing whatever it is it's supposed to be doing. So in our VFP application, we're going to put a timer in. So every 2 minutes, the service will do something. And it doesn't matter who I'm logged in as, or if I'm even logged in. The service will keep doing that forever. And if it crashes, it'll restart itself. And if the system reboots, it'll restart the service. Whereas a COM object is a tool to be used right now in my active use of whatever I'm doing in my application. All right, let's take a brief pause here, and I'd like to find out if there's any questions in general about the services versus COM objects.
Yes, you mentioned that map drives don't work, but do UNC paths work?
No. The only way is to set the service to run as a different user, which has trade-offs because you lose some of the elevated security. But if you elevate the security, as most services do, cannot access those drives. I'm not completely sure why. Microsoft has never explained why that is. I don't know if that's a quote-unquote feature or bug, but you cannot do that.
Okay, that's it for now.
Anything else?
Nope, that's all.
All right. Now, calling our service from other applications. We have to make a case for what it is that we're going to do with this exciting service we're going to build. It would be fun just to make a service so we can learn how to make one, but I think it would be better if we tried to do something that would be a little bit useful and demonstrate it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a service, and the service is going to sit there and run all the time, and it's going to monitor a table. And in that table are going to be lists of reports that are supposed to be printed to PDF files. And whenever our application wants a report printed to a PDF file, it'll put an entry in that table, and then it can go about its business and do whatever it wants. And the reason for that is we do reports. We're going to get to in a second here. We do reports. So we create a report, and it has a long SQL, and it can be sitting there for a long time. And the user doesn't know if it's hung or not. The user has no idea if it's hung. So therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to take the results of our SQL, turn it into a XML file, and save it, and let our service do the rest. Now, I will mention to you that there's a cursor XML command there, and through much trial and error, I can tell you that these parameters are the ones you want if you want to take the XML back to VFP afterwards. The namespace, the output format, the element, these are exactly the parameters that will allow you to take the XML file back into VFP as easy as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to designate an output file. Now, in this case, I've used a folder called VFP reports, and I've given it a random system name. Then I'm going to run my execute my SQL, and then I'm going to put into this VFP reports table, I'm going to put the name of the cursor that I just gave it. I'm going to put the XML data. I'm going to put what report form to use. I'm going to put what output type. In our case, we're going to use PDF. There's going to be a binary for whether or not it's fully submitted. There'll be a place to store the output file. And there's actually one that says finished, which I left off here. So I'm going to add that into my table in VFP reports. And then I'm done. I can go back and do whatever I want. Now, the reason I want to do that, let's take a look at an actual VFP example. There we go. So this is going to be our running program. The user is going to select a report from this dropdown. Now, once they've selected the report from this dropdown, they will press the button that says Run Report. This Run Report button will execute the SQL command that will create the output. It will take that output. It will change it into an XML. It will put that XML into the VFP reports table. And then that's it. Now, in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure the user knows that it's not hung. We're going to call a form called rep status. And what rep status is going to do is it's going to set a timer, and it's going to keep asking the service, is the report done? And if not, it's going to increment the timer. So the user can sit there and see, oh, it's been 5 seconds, it's 10 seconds, it's still going. And especially on the web, this is a very difficult thing to do. And if the user gets tired, they can press cancel, and they'll get a message when it's ready. But I can sit here and I can watch, and I can see right from my website whether or not my report is ready or not. And then I can open it up as it'll open up as a PDF. We're going to see exactly how all this is going to work. But we've got here running a report. We take the SQL. We stick it all into the table that our service will use. Then we open up a form, and we use that form to wait until our service finishes its job. Now, the service could be taking report requests from 50 different applications. And all of the code and information necessary to create all the different output types, whether it's Excel, PDF, etc., is all in our service. All our application has to know is, I would like a PDF file, please. I would like an Excel file, please. I would like a Word document, please. And our service will produce the proper document. Any questions so far about that? I might have explained it a little too quickly, but are there any questions?
There were none.
All right. So now we've got a report going, and we've put it into our table that the service is watching. And now we're going to go and we're going to wait for it to be done or go about and do about our business. We don't have to sit there and worry about it being hung. And that's a constant problem. I mean, if you go into Westwind Web Connect on their forum, people are always asking, what's the best way to make sure the user doesn't think that it's hung when they run a long report? So this is a particular system that I'm going to demonstrate to you has reports that can take 40 minutes to run. You know, a 30 or 40,000 page report for the end of the year. And the user will definitely think it's been hung. But with either a progress gauge or a time seconds elapsed, something demonstrating that it's still working. If the user wants, they can wait and they know that it's still going. So now that service has to be made that will create those reports and use that table as we just said. This is a little bit of summary of what I just told you here. It's too long to wait for the report, but not only too long to wait for the report, I didn't mention as well, there could be many, many people asking reports on the system. And the system will get bogged down. So, for example, the application I'm going to show you can have 100 users on it. Now, probably only 30 or 40 of them are going to ask for reports. But that's easily going to bog the system down. So the pseudocode for what we have to do is as follows. We have to initiate, we have to add a record to the table, create a progress bar. And this is what our rep status form does. Request the report parameters. It initiates the timer object to check, and it puts everything into the service table VFP reports. Our table fields are a little more extensive than what I gave in the previous example. In our particular case for a service, I have two options. I can either put the raw SQL command in, or I can put the XML output in. And then it'll show whether it was what report form to use, whether it was submitted, whether it was started, whether it's finished, so we can see if it's in progress, what percentage done, the output type, the output file, a GUID, which we use for distinct identification of the table, an error message if there's an error, and we also have the ability to chain multiple reports together. You can chain a second and third report together if the need for that were to arise. And that's the table that's going to be populated. Now, we're using XFRX to format our output into PDF, Excel, etc. Now, we could use Foxy Preview or any other tool that we wanted. I've used XFRX for many years, and I've always been happy with it. And it can create any of the different file types that we're talking about. So let's see how exactly we're going to make our service. Our service consists of only one PRG. One PRG. We don't need any OLD public class. All we need is code and a read events. So code and a read events is more like a regular VFP application than it is like a COM object. And that's exactly true. We're going to give it a bunch of code to do. And then we're going to do a read events. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some sets. We're going to make sure that service support is enabled. We're going to make sure that if anybody, for some reason, a message were to try and open up, despite the fact that we tried not to do that, it'll be suppressed. Put our class libraries in our procedure. And we have our timer. This timer here. And the timer is what does the heavy lifting. Every X milliseconds, it fires the method run report. What run report does, it checks for any new entries. It validates the submitted parameters. It runs the actual report to generate a cursor, outputs the report, and updates the status request. Whoa, that's an awful lot of stuff. Let's take a look at the code behind that. Forgive my slow typing, but I can't really see the screen very well. To illustrate what I was saying, here's our VFP reports project. It consists of a PRG and the XRFX library. That's it. There's no documents. All right. It has the XFRX classes in it for printing, but our program that we created consists of main PRG. Now, in our main PRG, the run report is fired by the timer. So the run report is a very careful set of steps. It turns off any error handling because we don't want to accidentally try and generate error messages. It opens this VFP reports table. That's the table that our report creating program stuck all the information into. It's going to look for items that have been submitted but have not been started. And if there's none, it's going to return. Once it finds something that's been submitted but has not been started, it changes the flag to started to be true. It finds the name of the report form. It checks to make sure the report form exists. And if not, it can't give an error message, so it puts the error into the table and returns. So if it has the report form and everything is correct in the table, it looks at the output type. Right? Now, these output types are just a few samples of the output types that can be created in XFRX. If there's no output type, it also gives an error. Now, once all that's been done, it uses XML to cursor to bring our data back to a VFP cursor. If necessary, it chains report number 2 and report number 3. It executes all that code that just loaded. And then it creates, this is the code that creates an XFRX object. An XFRX object consists of a couple objects, report session. Report session loads all of the parameters that it needs to create a PDF. And we have a try, catch, and try here to try and print the report form to the PDF. And if we did it okay, then we mark that the report is finished in VFP reports. That's the entire service, other than the timer that runs. That is the entire service. And the deep dark, dirty secret is most services are not more complicated than that. The reason Microsoft has gazillions and gazillions of services is most of them do one simple thing. There are some services from third-party vendors especially that are more complex, but Microsoft tends to make a lot of little services. All those SVC hosts do different things. So that's it. Our procedure is a timer, and it basically loops through and looks for entries. And this happens all the time, 24/7. If I don't have to be logged in, it does it all the time. Right? And it creates up to 1, 2, 3 sequels to chain together, creates a report form, and outputs it as a PDF or an Excel or whatever it wants, and then it marks it as finished. If an error occurs anywhere along the way, it fills in the error message into the table because it does not know what application requested this report. It doesn't know and doesn't care. It's application agnostic. It knows where the data is, where the report form is, what's supposed to happen, and it doesn't care who asked for it. The XFRX code is there because I use it. I mean, it's not a cop-out, it's not free, it does a good job. But other things, Foxy Previewer, it all do a fine job too. You're going to replace that code with whatever code you need to create your own output files. Now, we're going to build our VFP report service. Notice the options we've checked off here. No comm servers, no nothing. We're just going to make a regular old executable. That's it. No comms, no DLLs, no OLE publics, no nothing. All we do is compile our main PRG with our XFRX classes. And that's our entire service program. Now we have VFP reports.exe, our wonderful service. Now all we have to do is take that and install it onto the server, right? Right. How hard can that be? Well, Microsoft, sometimes I just have to sigh when I have to explain what Microsoft has done or does over the years, because I know that when I explain it, it's going to sound a little weird, but think of the weirdness from Microsoft, not from me, okay? There are two different kinds of things that Microsoft used and uses to create services. SRV-any. And SRV-any was the original way to create a service. Up until Windows 2008, that was the only way. Now, it really sort of installs itself as a wrapper. That's where the SVC host comes from. And that's why serve-any is an abbreviation for service anything. But you can't just install it like that. You have to use a separate program called instaserve to install the serve-any to run your service. So therefore, we'd have a service called VFP serve, and serve-any would be running it, and we installed it with instaserve. And then all we have to do is add a few registry keys. And the enthusiasm for our service is diminishing by the second. Now, Microsoft figured that was a very difficult way of doing things. So it created a new program called SC. SC started with Windows 2008, 7, 8, 10, etc. No more instaserve. Instead, they want you to use a newer SC, which in theory, Microsoft claims can install and configure services easily, because our VFP application doesn't meet the criteria of being able to stop, start, and pause. So therefore, we need some way to run it So Microsoft says, use our SC program as a wrapper. So we have to download ServAny because that's the wrapper. We don't have InstaServe anymore, so we have to download SC, use SC to install ServAny and tell ServAny what our VFP application name is, and then edit the registry to have ServAny start our VFP application in service. The good news is this actually works, despite sounding pretty cumbersome. And the white paper has detailed instructions on this process. But before your enthusiasm for the service dims too much, let me tell you something. Microsoft uses a wrapper. It doesn't run many of these programs directly as a service. It uses the SRV Any wrapper, which used to be installed with InstaServe and now is installed with SC. But to ServAny, the SVC host is running that. Well, you know what, people? If Microsoft can use its own wrapper, then so can we. What's good for Microsoft is good for us. So we're going to get a wrapper because ServAny is very difficult to work with. Reporting, debugging, it's a nightmare. And Microsoft is not all that enthusiastic about people using it. They, third parties use services, but they really only intended it originally to be used as part of Windows. So it was only a matter of time until somebody figured out a better way. With ServAny, there's no error reporting, for example. If you start or stop ServAny, it'll try and start or stop your VFP program, VFP reports.exe, but you won't know if it did or not. There's no return codes. There's no debugging. And that's not just for reports services made in Visual Fox Pro. Using any application as a service is a goal of developers for all kinds of platforms. So there was a large demand for an easier way to implement these services. And for years, people pressed Microsoft requesting, you simply have to do that. Microsoft had absolutely no interest in the issue whatsoever. They never, ever wanted to encourage third-party vendors using services to begin with, even though they all do. So the fact that at Microsoft headquarters, they know how to use ServAny is good enough for them. Well, it was only a matter of time until someone figured out a better way, and that better way came from a company called Core Technologies. Core Technologies has a product called Always Up. Always Up is the dream answer to running applications as a service. The whole SRV anything was a nice new Chevy, but Always Up is our Ferrari. It will help us VFP developers include our program as a service. And in fact, anyway, you could use any program as a service with this. We're particularly interested in VFP. Now, okay. This is the marketing blurb from the Core Technologies company. All of these different things that it can do, any application, easy to use, monitors your application. You can log in via a website on your server and manipulate things. You can detect misbehaving things, restart your application. It's got everything you would ever dream of in setting up a program as a service without having to use the ServAny SVC host and all these other wrappers. And that's fine with Microsoft because Microsoft does not wish to get involved in the service creation business. All right, so we use in our office, and we're going to use here, Always Up to install, test, and manage all of our services. Very smooth. I could give a whole session on Always Up. Not that that's like a plug for an idea or anything. It's $49.99 for one server. I think it's about $50 a server, and there's a 30-day trial on their website. And let's take a look at how that works. Trying to make this a little bit bigger to see. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that or not. The viewing fonts here are not adjustable. So we're going to see, we'll open it up and see the details of how we set it up. Right, when we add our VFP application as a service, we tell it, okay, the application is VFP reports, VFP reports.exe. We could give it arguments if we want. We can tell it the starting folder. We can tell it to start the application automatically, manually. We can tell it what user to log in as. Now, normally it logs in as a system user, but you can change that, local system. In this particular example, have it logged in as the an administrative user so we can access other drives and other computers. You have a whole bunch of options for what to do when the service needs to be restarted. If it stops and crashes, you can either immediately restart it or you can restart after a certain amount of time. And it'll keep trying for as long as you tell it to keep trying for. Now, it monitors the service as well. It'll give you an email or whatever kind of communication you want when any kind of different events happen. And you can select which events you want. For example, if anytime it hangs longer than a certain amount of time, it'll send you an email. Anytime memory usage or CPU usage gets too high. Anytime, or it can just give you a status report every certain number of days or hours. So we get a status report once a day. And it sets up the email. It also allows us to do connection of network drives, which, as I said, services are not allowed to do, but always up connects them, and then gives that information to the service. You can tell it any dependencies. Now, we also do is you can have all kinds of additional applications running. We also have it automatically reboot the service once a day, just as a precautionary measure. And we also tell it anytime it looks like it's going to show some sort of user error message, suppress that. On many other technical options here. And then I can start and stop it from this control. This control is also available on the web as a web version. I can start it, I can stop it. And Always Up provides the wrapper service that SVC hosts and SRV-Any provides to Windows services. Only it provides about 18,000 more capabilities, all the things that Microsoft should do if they really were interested in making something that could robustly manage a service. So this particular service for report writing, we've got it set up that it logs in automatically. It starts the executable in a certain folder. Now, it doesn't mean that a user's logged in. Anytime the system reboots, it automatically starts up. It sends us an email once a day with a status report of how many times it was accessed, what it did it hang at all. If it hangs, it tries to restart it 5 times every 2 minutes. If that doesn't work, it sends us an email. Once a day at midnight, it restarts the service just as a precautionary measure. We haven't, but we could limit the CPU and memory usage of the service. We know VFP likes memory. We can limit it to a certain amount of memory, a certain amount of disk space, etc. And then we have our perfect running service. Let's pause for a moment. Questions? We had a lot of info since the last questions. Any questions?
Yeah, I got a few questions.
All right, hit me.
Does the service app have to have access to the current user's clipboard, or is this considered a UI function?
That's a very good question, because usually I'm just thinking out loud, the service usually runs as the user called local system. So it would have local systems clipboard, which is not really very helpful. I think just I don't know, if you wanted to use the clipboard functions in VFP, would it put it out to the regular clipboard? I don't know. I'm skeptical of that. Skeptical whether that's considered a UI or not. It's a good question. I think not, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Do you know of any way to execute the report form command from a COM object, or or from a service, I keep getting feature is not available.
Okay, if you're getting features not available, you mean when you run you could certainly, you could just go to a VFP window or a command line and run that exe. And you should see it. It'll come up. It'll just sit there on an empty screen. If it comes up and there's an error message, then that's why it won't instantiate as a service, because there's no error messages allowed. But theoretically, you could just start it and it'll just sit there on a read event screen with a timer running, and you can see what happens.
Yeah, there was some discussion possibly multi-threaded DLLs don't support VFP reports.
I don't know.
What about the support VFP libraries? Where should they be located? Is there a start in option for the service like you can with something like Task Scheduler?
Yes.
Okay. And does Always Up have a runtime license so it can be distributed?
No. It's installed on the server, and I don't know of a runtime license. But the more you buy, the cheaper it is per server. So if you're buying 25 servers, it's going to $20 something a server. I believe that from the web control panel, you can manage multiple servers as well. Now, unless they've added that in recently, as far as I know, you have to buy a license for each server, but they get progressively cheaper. I've never looked into buying it for 400 servers. Maybe when you get to that point, something's different. Okay. We have it on like 20 servers.
Okay, that's all the questions.
All right. Now, before we do our live example, there is a gotcha here. And that gotcha involves security. And that is that when you have an application running or a COM object running, you're subject to the rights, whether it be network rights or whether it be hard drive rights, NTFS permissions, whatever, of whoever the user is that's logged in. So if I log in user Fred, and I start a VFP application, whatever rights Fred has, I now have, which means that if I call a COM object and Fred can go to the C drive but not the D drive, I can't go to the D drive because I'm Fred. Services usually run as a local system, and services are subject to the security rights of the service, not of the user, not of the application user, which means a service which uses a local system account has security rights to just about everything in the world. Now, for a user, Fred, we harden the environment and we make sure that Fred can only reach whatever he's supposed to be able to reach. And we test it out, make sure that Fred has all the rights he needs. Serve any is not quite the same easiness, but with Always Up, there is an option to allow network drive access. Even with that, it's subject to the rights of the service user, which means that the service user may have access to all kinds of stuff that Fred's not supposed to have access to. Or conversely, it may not have access to stuff it needs that Fred has access to. It's a lot more work testing out the rights for something to run as a service. Because running it on a developed machine versus a production actual server or actual workstation is very different. I can set up an environment right here in my development area where I've got user Fred, and I've got a mock-up of their runtime, of their production environment, and I can make sure that Fred has all the rights to what he needs, that VFP is going to do whatever. With a server, it's a lot more complicated to test that out. Because remember, service gives you no error messages. Service doesn't give you a UI. So therefore, there's a lot of testing to make sure that whatever user you're running that service as can do what it's supposed to do, but not more. That's the big gotcha with the services. And I think having worked with services for a long time, that's really the only significant gotcha I've ever seen. Now let's take a look. I think you can see what's on the screen. You see a big thing that says Pesach Fund, I'm assuming. Yes, okay. Yes. Just want to make sure everyone's seeing that. If you do not see a big thing that says select report on the screen, then someone unmute and tell me.
It's all good.
Okay, this is an actual live application that people are using right now. So I'm going to select a short report, a list of people who did a certain thing. I'm going to press run report. Up comes my rep status, telling me that I have a certain, clicking off the seconds. It will be incredibly embarrassing this didn't work. Oh, please select a report. Oh. Okay, so now my report is being generated. Please wait. And I'm going to wait a few seconds. I'm going to see how long it's going to run here. Take a while. Oh, it's good. It's not hung. Right now, my VFP report service is producing this report and converting it into a PDF. And it opens my PDF. It would appear that I don't have rights in Chrome to open PDFs. Let's see here. All right, let's, okay, there we go. It opened it up in Excel. If I did a report that was a PDF, usually PDFs we prefer to open in the web browser. So here's the PDF of our report. And if I wanted to, I could just go about my business, do something else while my super long report is running, because some of these reports are really, really very long to run. And this looks very simple, but what we've done is we put together a request to run a report. We've taken all the parameters and stuffed them into our VFP reports table. Then our VFP report service is running, and it created whatever we asked for. It created Excel or created a PDF. We open it up for our friendly user, and the user is happy. And we don't have to worry about it looking like it's hung. We don't have to worry about how long it takes, etc. And if the user doesn't want to stay on this screen, wants to cancel, keep going on with their work, the timer is running, and it'll still open up the PDF whenever the PDF is ready. And it could be 1 minute, it could be an hour. That PDF we just ran that took 30 seconds, takes 30 seconds. I think there's only 2 other users on the system. In the busy season, there's 200 users on the system. That 30-second PDF takes 5 minutes. And any other application could be putting reports in there. The VFP report service doesn't know, doesn't care. Print anything you want. You've told it what report form to use, what data to use, and where to store the thing. So those services really can be the best way, or sometimes the only way, really, to accomplish certain tasks accurately and efficiently. With our VFP expertise, we can leverage that to create a service from any VFP application. If you'd have come to me before I ever worked with services and said, I'd like for you to get a VFP application, have it run as a service all the time, I'd have had no idea how to do that. I'd have somehow tried to make it start up all the time when you logged in or something like that. But by using it as an actual service and making our lives easier by using a wrapper that was created not by Microsoft, but by a third party, we really can leverage that VFP expertise, and we can make a service that can handle requests from 150 different programs, all doing the same kind of thing. That's basically the summary of our session. Please fill out your evaluations, and now we'll take any questions you have.
Okay, there's a question here that does the service you showed to run reports, does the service you showed run reports one at a time?
Yes.
Okay, if yes, can it be made to run more than one at a time?
Yes. The question is the best way to do that. I would probably run multiple copies of the service because the service is very light. I mean, it takes up almost no room in memory. It's very light, and it has almost no drag on the CPU. But in theory, if you wanted to have you could. That would probably be the easiest way to do it. I know people like to make things complicated and have multi-threads and all kinds of things, but it would be much simpler probably to have multiple copies of the service running. And in fact, Microsoft does that frequently. A lot of those SVC hosts, if you really dig into them, it's the same executable. It's running at 4 different times.
Okay. Another question. How do you do a DMZ setup with the service?
That's a very good question. The service has to run on the web server. So if your web server is in your DMZ, you have no problem. So basically, the service is as exposed as the server is.
Okay. Another question, could you explain again in simple terms, again, the difference between multi-threaded DLLs, objects, and a service?
I would love to. So the service runs all the time in the background, doing whatever we've asked it to do. And it does not communicate in any way with the logged in user or with the screen or the desktop or anything like that. It's been sent off on a mission, and it's been told, keep doing this forever. Unless we tell you to stop, but keep doing this. And whenever the computer starts up, keep doing this. That's your job. Whereas a COM object is something that we want to have control over and we want to instantiate. For example, an Excel worksheet. So we're going to instantiate that, and that's a COM object now. We're going to do something with that. We're going to put data into it. We're going to save it. We're going to do a mail merge, whatever we're going to do with it. But we own that object now. If I log out, there's no more Excel object left. If I cancel that Excel object, it's not there anymore. If I never instantiate it to begin with, it's not there. It's only there when I request it. It only does what I ask it to, and it only stays as long as I keep it. So a COM object, we open it up and instantiate it. We tell it what to do, and then we have to close it. Whereas a service just runs all the time, doing whatever it's supposed to do. Is that a better explanation?
Yep, I think that was clear.
Okay.
Do you know of a way to see what service host is running?
That's a very good question. There is a way, and sorry, I remember how to do that.
Yeah.
Service host.
Somebody already answered that Process Explorer can show you what apps are running.
That's exactly the right answer. Whoever said that gets a bunch of brownie points.
That was Chris Vesper.
Yeah, but you have to, yes. So that's the only way to find out because they're all named the same.
Yep. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. Please fill out your evaluations. As everybody knows, speakers live and die by those evaluations. This is a shameless plug. I'm going to go over to the session, the question and answer session. And if anybody wants to come over there and discuss this further, I'll be happy to be there.